This episode is brought to you by ARX. You want to be a successful strength training studio owner. The problem is you aren't able to deliver the safest, most efficient and effective workouts, making it harder for you to attract and retain clients, which makes you feel frustrated. I understand that it can be difficult to differentiate your business without the right tools. ARX's breakthrough adaptive resistance technology uses patented motorized resistance and computer software to give you and your clients the perfect workout every single time. BioFit founder John Zarbok says that ARX is clearly the superior tool to deliver the exercise stimulus. My clients are seeing insane improvements in weeks, not months. I could not fathom running my business without ARX. So here's how you get started. Number one, go to arxfit.com/HOB to get $500 off your ARX machines. Number two, book a call with the ARX sales team. And number three, learn how ARX can help you grow your strength training business. Go to arxfit.com/HOB so you can stop struggling to attract and retain clients and start to grow your strength training business with confidence. Lawrence Snell here, and welcome back to High Intensity Business, the podcast where we discuss high intensity strength training and provide you with the tools, the tactics, and the strategies to help you grow your strength training business. This is episode 363, and the topic of this episode is the High Intensity Training Fundamentals series with Tim Ryan. This is part 6. Tim is a master super slow instructor and owner of Strong Life Personal Training in Barrington, Illinois. If you prefer to read, you can download the transcript for this podcast over at highintensitybusiness.com. Just search episode 363. And there's a button on the post to download the transcript. You can contact Tim. So I did this a little bit in the wrong order. You can contact Tim to learn about his services to studio owners and personal trainers, including workshops, mentoring, and seminars by going to his website, stronglifetraining.com, or emailing Tim to info@stronglifetraining.com. Tim, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Great to be with you and excited to continue the series. So we agreed to just wrap up the kind of point we were focused on towards the end of the last part, which was the determination of optimal weight load and resistance level. So would you like to just wrap this one up, perhaps give a little summary of that before we move on?
Yeah, definitely. And just real briefly to get through this, we've spent a lot of time talking about the time under load and determining the right weight load and how repetitions maybe factor into that. And I think the only thing I want to say is just to kind of bring us to the point that when we're training, we want to make sure that we are, using enough load that we're bringing about the stimulation that we're after. And we've got to create that high level of muscle tension. We've got to bring about that deep state of fatigue. There's got to be, some significant hard work involved. And that is where this idea of using the proper weight load becomes so important, because without the proper weight load, you're just basically not going to be training at a high enough level and using enough stimulation to get at those factors that we need. So we've spent a lot of time on that. And I think what happens, what I've seen over and over and over again, particularly even more so with the sort of the super slow crowd, is that trainers become so fixated on wanting the client to have such ultra perfect form and technique that they will oftentimes put the weight load too light, not a high enough level load, in order to get the client to conform. And then, that you run the risk of maybe you get better conformance with the technique and the form and, those type of details, but then you end up with not a high enough weight load. and you have the client going on and on and on for an excessive time under load. So in other words, I've seen super slow and trainers having their clients in the exercise performing for 3 to 4 minutes time under load. And they're doing that because they've put the weight so light so that the client behaves themselves with regard to form and technique. But now they've kind of shot themselves in the foot because now they don't have enough load. They've got excessive time under load, too many repetitions, et cetera. That point of muscle failure and achieving you want to establish proper load on the person and be bringing about a state of momentary muscle failure within the proper time frame. So at any rate, without going in and rehashing all those details, I had just mentioned that the difficulty is getting the client to behave themselves or getting them to conform to the proper technique and things like that. And this is where the problem comes in, is because clients tend to commit a lot of discrepancies in form. All right. And those discrepancies can be, quite vast. I always say it's like, I'm surprised at what clients will come up with in order to basically cheat. They will create various form discrepancies and do things incorrectly in order to essentially lift weight. And it seems an endless supply of what people will invent in order to sort of help themselves make the exercise easy. And, there's many reasons for this. One, straight gate is that proper exercise, it is hard work. It's uncomfortable. It results in a lot of different physiological symptoms where they are, it's causing discomfort. So whether that is sort of muscle burning, muscle ache, whether it's just the high level of tension and strain going on within the muscles, whether it's the elevated heart rate, the elevated breathing rate, all these different physiological symptoms that are occurring. People don't like that, so they seek ways to try to avoid it. You also have a situation where clients will just that feeling of that heavy load on their muscles and then performing a repetition, particularly a very slow repetition, where they've got to sustain that contraction and endure that high level of tension or that muscle straining for not only a long duration repetition, but for the course of the entire set of the exercise for, whether it's a minute or a minute and a half or what have you. So it is what I'm getting at here with these discrepancies, and I'll kind of go through some of the more common ones. But basically, all of these discrepancies, sort of removing tension from the muscle, relieving themselves of these uncomfortable feelings, or perhaps just trying to make the exercise easier in the sense of getting the weight to move and getting the repetition to complete. So I think one of the biggest things that occurs is what we would classify as off-awning. All right. And what this simply means is that a client sort of tries to remove the load or reduce the load or the tension from the muscles by sort of a series of starting and stopping, sort of pushing against the load and then backing off momentarily to kind of release some of the tension, and then pushing again and backing off, and sort of alternating their effort. So rather than maintaining a constant sustained effort and constant sustained muscle contraction, it's a series of sort of placing and removing tension, or briefly not pushing as hard as they could, and sort of throttling their tension and their effort. And this
Is
results
that
in
what results in that jerky movement,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. And basically you can have a situation where this idea of off awning, this is going to encompass other interrelated things, such as segmentation. So think of off awning as just not maintaining a constant sustained contraction or a constant sustained level and effort. It's sort of an ununiform application of their effort. And it could result in being somewhat imperceptible in terms of, to the external view of somebody watching them perform the exercise. And it doesn't necessarily need to involve movement. I mean, you can be off awning when you're sort of at the point of or close to failure. You can sort of push and release, and you may not see the weight doing anything differently, but internally they're contracting and then kind of releasing that tension. So when I referred to segmentation a minute ago, segmentation is a form of off awning where there's movement occurring, but the movement is unsmooth. So I often compare this by analogy. If you have a clock or a watch where the second hand, there's different types of watches or second hands where some of them are very smooth and continuous, just a very slow moving, continuous second hand, versus some sort of snap to each second, where it's sort of a segmented movement where it momentarily pauses and then snaps to the next second, and then pauses and snaps to the next second. So segmentation is that sort of pausing and snapping and pausing and snapping, sort of stop and go type of movement.
It's a great metaphor when describing what you're looking for of a client, what you just said there.
Yeah. So keep in mind, what we desire is a continuous, smooth, uniform movement. All right. So it's essentially a constant movement, uniform in motion, not a series of starts and stops and starts and stops, not a series of sort of pressing and releasing or pressing and releasing, but keeping that uniformity and that smoothness. So those are things that tend to happen a lot with people, because I think, again, it's a matter of they're feeling that tension, they're feeling that muscle straining. They seek to sort of relieve themselves of that. So they kind of modulate their effort and sort of back off momentarily in order to give themselves a little bit of a respite. Okay. Mm-hmm. And keep in mind that even though the weight may still be in the air, even though there may be some load still on their muscles, this series of adjusting their effort and sort of momentarily pausing or whatnot, this does relieve some amount of tension from the muscle and some amount of straining, to where they will be partially or reducing the load or the stimulus on their muscle. So another thing that occurs, another typical discrepancy, is something we call ratcheting. And this kind of, again, by way of analogy, think of a tool which is called a ratchet, where you've got a socket and a ratchet, and you kind of crank the ratchet and it moves and turns the bolt or whatever, and then you backtrack and go the other direction to reset the ratchet, and then you do it again, and you're kind of this back and forth motion where there's sort of forward motion and then momentarily kind of falling back a little bit, and then re-engaging the motion again, and sort of do, similar to segmentation, but almost like kind of pushing, back sliding a little bit, pushing again, backsliding a little bit, or even combining this with sort of pushing, stopping momentarily, and sort of adjusting their body position. Mm-hmm. They'll kind of adjust their shoulders, or they'll they'll twist and squirm a little, and you again have this sort of disjointed movement where it's unsmooth, it's not uniform, it's not continuous, but it's a series of sort of pushing and then falling back and pushing and maybe twisting or hunching or
How
bringing
do
their
you,
shoulders
just
in.
curious, I know this might digress a little bit, but I think it's important to just talk about these little things as we go through. When someone does that, so I see that a lot on the MedX leg press, people pushing out, and then when they're in that almost locked out position, they start adjusting their hips and their body.
Yeah.
And I see that, and I'm curious, what cues do you use to stop people from doing that? What do you say, or what do you do? Maybe it's a setup thing.
Well, first you just give them a slap upside the head and tell them to knock it off.
Yeah, just whack them. Yeah, that's great.
No, that's what you'd like to do. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because keep in mind, some of this comes back to teaching them the process in the first place. Is that you've got to set the stage, you've got to explain what your expectations are, you've got to sort of describe what you're after with particularly not just the overall form and body position type of things, but the idea of this consistent, smooth, uninterrupted, uniform type of motion is what you're after. So one of the things I'm doing is as I'm coaching them, I'm sort of reminding them of these things, and if they're doing it correctly, giving them that positive reinforcement, complimenting them and letting them know that I'm pleased with their performance. If I see them getting a little squirrely or something, the first thing I'll do is explain, okay, now settle down. You're getting a little quick with that, or you're not maintaining the smoothness. You're kind of jabbing at it, or I don't want to see those starts and stops and things like that. Specifically towards your question there, say on the leg press, where they get out there and they start fidgeting or something like that. Yeah, I mean, again, I'll say, okay, now don't get into that. Don't sit there and pause at that position. On the leg press, you're not going to pause in the straight-legged position or near the straight-legged position. But particularly, if I see them twisting their hips or jostling their position a little bit, just obviously address that immediately with them. And normally that'll correct. And I'll get very proactive. So if I see them do that on a rep or two, and I make the corrections to it, and they still don't seem to be complying, I'll be very ready to that on that next rep, right as they're nearing that position, is to immediately remind them, okay, now you're not going to pause out there. You're not going to wiggle and twist, and, make sure that you immediately just smoothly turn that around, make that transition. No need to adjust, your hips and things like that. So hopefully by making those comments and being proactive and being ready to make the correction or remind them of what you're after, most people will comply and take care of that. If by chance they're not complying and you're still seeing those problems and they still just keep doing, because sometimes people, it's like you kind of wonder, am I talking? Can they hear my voice or something like that? One of the things that tends to happen, I think, with people is sort of in the heat of the moment, when they're under the duress or the stress of the exercise, and when they're in this uncomfortable stage, I don't know, maybe they aren't hearing you. Maybe they're just so focused on what they're doing, or they're so intent on the feelings that they're experiencing, that maybe they're not paying as much attention or hearing you the way you may think. So sometimes it takes maybe a pause in the exercise to kind of reset. Okay. And I guess depending on the level of severity of the discrepancy and how, perhaps dangerous I think it is, I may stop a person and tell them to set the weight down and say, literally just unload from the exercise, and then have a moment or two of conversation about what's been going on and how important it is not to do that. And then perhaps after that, re-engage the exercise. Another thing that you might do, again, depending on the exercise, is, with that leg press, is that, okay, when you get your legs out there and you're at that extended position near the straight kneed position, maybe tell them to just, okay, let's stop and hold it right here. Okay, just take a deep breath, settle down a little. You're okay. Get yourself set. And when you're focused and a little more relaxed, just take a deep breath and now slowly proceed from there, and just kind of break the cycle of that and get them to settle down a little bit. Okay. You can do that too with something like the leg extension, when they extend up and they're at that straight kneed position. If they're getting a little panicky, if they're misbehaving in some way, just say, okay, let's just pause right here, hold the weight right there, completely stop, hold it, take a deep breath, relax. Let's start to focus now and re-engage.
I'd say on the leg extension, though, they're going to be way more uncomfortable at that fully extended position than they will be on the Med-X leg press at the end, right?
Right.
But I hear what you're saying. I think that's a great piece of advice. One thing I just want to underscore, one of the things you said, which is if you notice it and then you correct it, let's say, specifically in regard to the wiggling of the hips, for instance, on the leg press, and then you notice they don't do it the next time around, then providing that positive specific feedback and saying, great job keeping your hips still, something along those lines, that's then going to reinforce that behavior as they get closer to failure. So that's a key. I just wanted to highlight that because I think that's kind of an important part of human behavior, isn't it? We have to reinforce the things that people are doing well so that when they're really approaching fatigue, they continue to do those things well.
Yeah. I think that positive reinforcement is very good. And, when you see somebody do exactly what you're expecting of them or asking of them, giving that positive reinforcement, I think goes a long way to, obviously giving the person that confidence, but also just that positive reinforcement, positive feedback is going to make them more want to do that, to continue to please you, if you will. So that's very important. And sometimes I'll say, oh, now that was an excellent repetition. You did that exactly right. Very good turnaround there. You kept it smooth. Let's use that as a pattern now. Put that right into this next rep and do that exact same thing, or something.
And for everyone listening, this transfers really well to your spouse.
Right.
If you want them to do something more, then say thank you and show that you appreciate it. It actually works really, really well. Because I think we take a lot of that stuff for granted when our spouse does something for us that's, nice. And for your employees and your team, if your team does something well, recognize it or reward it. It's really, this stuff it's kind of like common sense, but I think we often forget to do it. So
Yeah. And this is just basic human nature that, you've heard these old sayings that, you attract more bees with honey, or whatever. And just this idea of that you're going to get better reactions out of people with a lot of times with that positive reinforcement than with negativity and criticism, so, obviously there's times that you need to make corrections and you need to make people aware that they've done something, incorrectly or poorly, whatever. But yes, I mean, the value of this positive reinforcement is very important. And I think it goes a long way to getting not only better compliance, but getting people more happy with the whole process, so
definitely.
So yeah. So, you've got those kind of things. We've also got, sometimes what you have is something that we call falling through. And, that would be something, again, this, going back to this leg press idea, because in something like the leg press, as your legs are extending out and as you're getting closer to that straight knee position, you're gaining a tremendous leverage advantage. Okay. If you plot out the strength curve of this exercise, I mean, you're weaker in the bottom when your knees are up into your chest, and you're much stronger as you get pushed out there and your knees are straighter. Now the machine is designed to give you more load, with the resistance curve, give you more load as you're extending. But even with that, the rate at which you're gaining an advantage in leverage and so forth on that exercise still makes it somewhat easier out there in the more straight knee position than it does at the bottom of the movement, where you're trying to get out and push your legs out from the beginning. So one of the things that tends to happen is people will be slower with their movement during sort of the first half of the rep. And then as they start to feel that load sort of feel easier to move, they'll maybe rush the second half of the movement. So you're seeing somebody moving very slow and smooth and then rushing the end of it. Okay. And sometimes the reverse happens on the negative, where they're very slow as they're turning around and spending a lot of time out there near the straight leg position. And then as they start to lower the weight and their knees get closer into their chest, they'll rush to the bottom. Okay. So essentially, they're not maintaining sort of a constant uniform speed, and there's, half the rep is slow, and then they rush the end of the repetition. So that's what we call falling through. Sometimes you can get this with like the chest press, where again, the first half uniform movement, where they're keeping an even application of their efforts and an even application of the movement. So another one, and this is a big issue that comes up, is really overall sort of an improper breathing technique. But of more specific concern is something that we call Valsalva. Valsalva is sort of the act of holding your breath, but yet forcing air through a closed airway at the same time. So typically Valsalva would be sort of the breath holding, but the grunting, groaning, straining that you hear going on. All right. So they're not opening up their airway and having a free flow and exchange of air. They're sort of bearing down, grunting and straining, and sort of forcing a little bit of air through a closed airway. And what this is doing is it's placing a lot of strain on the vascular system and on the heart, because what's going on is that they're building up a lot of internal pressure with this. And that internal pressure is causing a rise in blood pressure and issues such as that, and kind of interfering with the circulation, through the heart. And it's not obviously giving you a good supply of oxygen through the exercise. And it's very common, because what people will want to do is, as soon as something becomes hard, they immediately kind of instinctually hold their breath and grunt and strain and do these kind of things. And it's really difficult to break. I'm just
curious, has that ever manifested itself have you heard in your own experience or other colleagues, has that ever manifested in like an acute trauma of any kind, or dangerous situation, or maybe it's manifested itself later on, like after the fact or after the event? Because I'm aware that it increases blood pressure, but I'm just curious if it's ever actually like manifested in like a disaster scenario that you're aware of.
Well, in terms of a disaster scenario, I was once told by someone that I don't know if they had heard of this or if it literally happened to them and one of their clients, but somebody did this and actually sort of had a stroke or something. Wow. one of the exercises, that they were really groaning, straining, creating all of this pressure, and maybe not a stroke, ruptured an aneurysm or something like that. I've heard of that, just kind of hearsay,
Sure. Yeah.
but I would say what I've definitely seen happen is this breath holding, grunting, straining, Valsalva type of effect, triggering an exercise induced headache, where
Right.
I don't know if you've ever experienced that with people, but where it brings on that headache, and they get this pounding a lot of times up the back of their neck and the back of their head, and it triggers that. I've definitely seen it do that. And even on the less dangerous side, it does interfere with your ability to perform at your highest level, because if you're sort of not getting a good exchange of oxygen, you're not going to be able to continue the exercise at your optimal level with your best
prematurely end the exercise, as well as produce other undesirable behaviors around form discrepancies. I noticed that come with that, right? Typically, their form is going to fall apart in terms of using more body English as they do the Valsalva as well.
Certainly, I think a lot of this stuff is all interrelated.
Yeah.
And like I said, any number of things could happen, and it all comes down to basically people trying to, I would say, two categories. One would be they're trying to come up with ways of making the exercise easier. Okay. Or they're trying to come up with ways of simply completing the repetition. Okay. So whether it's sort of this awning or segmentation, ratcheting, these kind of things, they're just
survival instincts, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. It's just shifting their position, contorting their body, pushing for a moment and then backing off to get a little relief, and things like that, and just doing things unsmoothly, all in an effort to sort of just complete the repetition or lift the weight. And basically in mind too is that I've been naming sort of these various discrepancies that we see, but overall too is that we want the person performing the exercises with the intended muscle groups, and we want the person maintaining the proper body position and engaging the muscles that we're targeting, and not substituting and shifting to other muscle groups. Okay, so you also have a lot of discrepancies that are related to that, where whether it's shrugging the shoulders or rolling the shoulders forward and hunching, whether it's shifting, twisting, squirming, doing different things. They're also kind of just trying to shift the load to other muscle groups. When the target muscle is getting fatigued, they're going to try to shift to have something else help them, so you get all kinds of different body contortions and shifting around and fidgeting and, doing things of that nature, where not only are they not smooth and not maintaining that constant tension, uniform motion, but they're also trying, basically shifting the load off the target muscle. Okay. And again, they may be successfully making the weight move or successfully completing a repetition. I probably shouldn't say successfully, but they are completing the repetition, but they're not doing it in the way that would be most advantageous for the target muscle group. So, ultimately, there's any number of things that somebody could do, and it's a matter of the person trying to make it easier, trying to complete a repetition at any cost, or trying to remove the discomfort, from what they're feeling and give themselves some relief. And ultimately, what all of this comes down to, there's sort of a common theme, or there's a common reason why all these things occur. And what it comes down to is a confusion on the part of the client between what the actual real objective is of the exercise versus what they assume the objective to be. And what I mean by this is that oftentimes the client assumes that the objective is the exercise is to complete a certain amount of repetitions or to essentially lift the weight, okay? So they focus more externally on just making the machine go or making the weight move, or as I say, completing the repetition, or basically being able to reach a goal of a certain amount of repetition. So, it certainly happens a lot when if the trainer is defining, how many repetitions should be performed, or somebody has in mind that I should do 10 repetitions on this exercise or something. Okay. What they're doing is they're trying to survive and complete those 10 repetitions at whatever cost. The idea is focused on that external goal of completing the repetition rather than the actual, what I would call the real objective is we are trying to essentially stimulate that muscle. We're trying to bring about a level of muscle fatigue. We're trying to achieve a deep inroad and fatigue that muscle, create that high level of muscle tension, that straining within the muscle fibers, and ultimately bringing that muscle to the point where its strength is temporarily depleted and they reach that point of momentary muscle failure. So if you think about this, if you successfully achieve the real objective, in other words, if you really successfully maintain that high level of tension on the muscle, you keep it isolated to the target muscle, you maintain smoothness and uniformity of motion, you're using the proper weight load, you're doing all of these things, maintaining the isolation on the target muscle, and successfully progressively weakening and depleting that muscle strength and ultimately bringing you to the point of muscle failure. That real objective that I just described literally prevents their assumed objective. Okay. In other words, if you fatigue your muscle and bring yourself to failure, you can't complete the repetition. And all those things I just described makes it harder to complete a repetition. Okay. So you can see where this is at odds. If they're thinking that the goal or the objective is to complete the repetition or lift the weight, then all the things I really want them to do are going to be sacrificed. Okay. And you have this constant competition between what the real objective is and what their assumed objective. Look at this another way. If they successfully achieve their assumed objective, it prevents the real objective. So either way you view it, the real objective prevents their assumed objective, or if they're successful in reaching their assumed objective, it's preventing the real objective. Okay. So with this confusion, you can see where if a client thinks that the goal is to lift the weight or complete the repetition, then however means they're able to do that and keep going, they're successful.
Pause on this for a second, because I like where you're going with this, and I understand. I'm just wondering, is there a way of, and I'm curious how you manage this in your studio, but is there a way of using both to your advantage? So, for instance, if I take myself and my own workouts, I like to know my assumed objective, right? Because I find it motivational and encouraging, and I will not break my form to achieve that. And maybe I'm an outlier, as many of us in high intensity training, we're not like our clients, right?
Yeah.
But I also think there's a place, and I think it depends how you just got to make sure you articulate it appropriately and effectively, where you can say to a client, look, you can describe the assumed and the real objective. You can explain that we are trying to weaken you and you are going to succeed by failing, which is an oxymoron and kind of confusing.
Yeah.
But you get, and that's difficult to explain. It definitely is. But at the same time, you can say, look, you got this many last time. Let's try and get this, but with the best form you can absolutely manage, but it is difficult to sort of help the client reconcile those things. So I'm curious, I know I sort of interrupted you mid-flow, but I'm curious how you use both of these to motivate the client. If indeed you do at all. I mean, maybe you don't even talk about reps or goals in that sense with clients, or time under load goals. This episode is brought to you by ARX. These are the most intense exercise machines I've ever used. I remember how fast the pull-down exercise took me to muscular failure and beyond. On the final negative or eccentric excursion, my tank was practically empty, but the adaptive resistance enabled me to continue to perform work until the predetermined end of the set. This experience was very profound and made me realize how effective ARX is in helping clients reach a high level of intensity in their workouts and ultimately produce the best results. I also love how ARX measures and tracks range of motion, rep cadence, total output and time, and more with real-time audio and visual feedback. These features are powerful sales and retention tools to help you convert and keep more clients. As a listener of the High Intensity Business podcast, ARX is offering you $500 off your machines. Just go to arxfit.com/HIB to book a call with the ARX sales team to learn how ARX can revolutionize and grow your fitness business. Again, go to arxfit.com/HIB, and now back to the episode.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you can, number one, explain to them what the real objective is, what you're after, what the purpose.
I think that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah. Explaining what the purpose of the exercise, and this doesn't necessarily occur all in one, session or whatever, but as you're going through this,
absolutely.
Yeah. As you're taking a new client and you're teaching them and you're kind of going through this whole process and, having them perform exercises, and you're giving them the instruction and teaching them what they're to do, in that process, there will be also a discussion of sort of framing what the expectation is, what that real objective is, and explaining to them, the things that they should be focused on and what sort of success means in this context. So that's part of it. And I think another thing that helps this is focusing more on the time under load as the sort of the reference point rather than achieving a certain amount of repetitions. Because if a person thinks that they're supposed to, achieve whatever your repetition range is, even going back to this notion of the original Nautilus protocol of, performing 8 to 12 repetitions per exercise. If you're focused on a certain amount of repetitions, I think that automatically leads to the client having that in their head that they're supposed to get that many repetitions. And then, of course, if they're in an exercise and they're feeling the fatigue setting in, they start to get more panicked that they're not going to reach the goal, whatever that is. If you're at 6 repetitions and you're got it in your head, you need to get at least 8, but that fatigue is setting in and you're getting, more and more desperate to achieve those repetitions, I think that automatically kind of triggers people to get sloppy just to get the rep. Okay. So oftentimes I find just focusing on the time under load is better. And I'll oftentimes say to people too, like if I see them getting sloppy, I've even had people say like, they're getting sloppy and I make a correction and they'll say, well, if I do it your way, I won't get the rep. And I say, well, I'm not asking you to get the rep. I'm asking you to, just focus on your effort and focus on the real objective. So I don't care if you get the rep. And sometimes people will try to, one of the discrepancies is to try to speed up and use momentum to complete the rep. I've told people, I'll say, you can't cheat the clock. All right. In other words, the time under load is the time under load. So you can squirm and cheat and try to use momentum and do all that, and you might complete the rep, but you're still going to be on this machine the same length of time. Okay. And if we're trying to achieve momentary failure and you keep doing things that thwart that, okay, you're not going to complete the exercise sooner. You're not going to get out of the exercise sooner because the time's the time. Okay. So you're going to be on this machine for 90 seconds, thereabouts. So whether you get 5 repetitions or 8 repetitions, or whether you do sloppy or not sloppy, you're not getting off the machine any sooner.
Yeah.
So, but I think definitely setting the expectations, teaching them in the beginning what the proper form is, what the objective is of the exercise, getting them to focus on those things. But ultimately, you can really trace back every single discrepancy as being a confusion between what they assume the objective is and what the real objective is, or the idea that I think it comes down to 2 things, is that they're trying to complete the rep, they're trying to just lift the weight, and they're also trying to avoid the discomfort. Okay. Which, again, is another thing that can't be avoided, that if you exercise properly and if you've, properly engaged the muscles and fatigue and ultimately reach the state of a momentary failure point in the exercise, that's going to be uncomfortable. There's no way around it. I mean, the muscles ache, the muscles burn, you feel that tension, that strain on the muscles, your heart rate's elevated, your breathing rate's elevated, your body temperature is increasing. I mean, these are all just physiological symptoms that are going to occur. You can't exercise successfully and avoid those things, so sometimes it may be just this whole confusion going on and this desire to complete the rep or desire to get the load off their muscles. But, part of it too is you've got to get the client to understand that this is going to be hard work. This is going to be somewhat uncomfortable, but keep in mind, it's not harming you. It's a momentary thing. As soon as you complete the exercise and you unload, set the weight down, that those feelings immediately go away. And, you just have to kind of talk the person through it. And, obviously some people are just not going to have the ability to do this as well as others. And there's going to be people that can tolerate the discomfort, better than others. And some of it comes with time as a person becomes more experienced, because when you've never done this before, and you consider that if you've got a client that's never really done any kind of serious hard work like this and never experienced these symptoms that are going on, it's maybe alarming. It's kind of a strange feeling to them. I once had a client, it was a woman who, she had been with me for, a couple of months or something like that. And she was in the leg press and going along on the leg press, and everything, was fine. The form seemed fine. She was performing well. And about halfway through the set, she suddenly set the weight down. And I said, "What's wrong? Why are you stopping?" And she goes, "Tim," and she grabs her chest and her heart. And she goes, "Tim, my heart is racing. I'm really breathing heavy and my heart is racing. I feel like my heart's beating out of my chest." And I said, "Yeah."
Go figure.
Yeah, and she goes, "No, Tim, I'm serious. I really feel like my heart rate's way up there." And I said, "Well, that's completely normal." I said, "I don't think anything unusual, is going on. As it should to provide those muscles with what they need." I said, "So there's really uh, nothing unusual going on here." But in her mind, that was such a foreign feeling. And as I talked to her, I discovered that she had really never done any kind of serious exercise. I mean, the most exercise she's had ever done is like go for a walk or something like that, or maybe do a bike ride, or those kind of things. So
And
I don't think she,
had it been a few months, had it taken a few months for her to experience that, because only now she was using her weight challenging enough that she was really starting to feel all that musculature being recruited and fatigued, and
yeah,
that
she
cardiovascular
had
response.
definitely
Yeah.
she had gradually progressed to that level where she was at a much more challenging level, and it was finally kind of engaging her at that higher level and bringing
Yeah.
about those feelings. And as I said, as I talked to her, I just realized that she had never really experienced this before. So in her mind, this was such a foreign feeling, and it alarmed her as if something was wrong. Okay,
Yeah.
like I don't know if she thought she was going to have a heart attack or something like that. But if you think about that, somebody that has experience and somebody that has, you know, done heavy exercise over the course of their lifetime, or even just engaged in sports and athletic activities, it doesn't have to necessarily be, heavy weight training or something. But just somebody that is used to sort of higher level exertions and the physiological feelings and reactions that go on with that, that person is going to perceive the hard work of exercise differently than someone that has very little experience with it. So, that's another thing that we have to kind of be aware of with people, that people's perception of what's going on can be very different. And some people
Yeah.
may even with a kind of relatively low level of work, those physiological symptoms may be, so foreign to them and so alarming to them that they think they're, being
Especially
tortured.
if they're very deconditioned as well, right?
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
it's going to be even
yeah,
more exacerbated. Yeah, I just want to underscore this. I think you make a really good point. And I think that's why, again, it goes back to probably the earlier parts of this series where we talked a little bit about the consultation and just making sure you develop a really good understanding of someone's exercise history and their background, so that you can meet them where they are and prepare to educate them, in piecemeal as to what this experience is going to be like and how it's different. And then to layer on top of that is to use this teaching focus that you and I have probably spoken about, and I've definitely mentioned it on ton of other podcasts, where every session, or at least weekly with each client, you're delivering a short teaching focus, right? And one of those
yeah,
teaching focuses could be the assumed and real objective that we've talked about today, and a myriad of other things. But this is not taking for granted that clients are just going to start to know all this stuff just through doing. I think it's you got to tackle both. You've got to educate during the set, and then also hopefully have some time to just talk to them and deliver like a teaching focus or something like that, where you are educating them every single week on this method of exercise, because it is complicated. There's so much to it, and we take it all for granted, especially. Well, I'm not saying you take it for granted, Tim, but you've been in this industry so long that you take a lot of these concepts are just so normal to you, whereas to a lot of our clients, they're so alien. So that's why it's so important, I think, to
yeah,
explain this stuff.
yeah. And it's very critical that you're providing an education. And I've been listening to your series with Al Coleman,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously he's made some very good points about setting the expectations with the client and explaining to them what you're looking for and what the objective is, and that kind of stuff, and getting them to focus in that. So there's definitely that need to provide that education and provide the framework and convey to the person so that they understand what it is, not only that real objective is, but what the expectation is for their form, their technique, the way they're holding their body, the way they're positioning themselves in the exercise, where the focus should be. All of those kind of things are very important. But then, as we've discussed here today too, during the exercise, when you see some of those things successfully taking place, giving that positive reinforcement and explaining to them, giving them that feedback that that was very good. You're very pleased with that. That's exactly what I was looking for. I really liked that last rep. That's what I want to see on each rep, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. But also, I think what's missing a lot too is that we need to have sort of this understanding of where that client may be and understanding their experience level and those kind of things. But oftentimes I think, because we're so experienced with this, and because we are sort of, like you mentioned earlier, the outliers, and we're into this thing and we like this and we've got experience with it and we're more willing to push ourselves and we're more accustomed to these uncomfortable feelings and symptoms that are going on. We oftentimes can forget that the person we're training is maybe nowhere near that kind of level, doesn't have the same experiences, doesn't have the same perception of things, and can be sort of alarmed or even frightened by some of these feelings. And when they start to feel them, they think something's wrong, or they think, this is crazy, this, whatever. And being able to recognize those things and not only provide good positive feedback, but also, where needed, take a moment to explain it and say, even kind of empathize with them. I'll oftentimes empathize, somebody gets done with a set of leg presses and, somebody that's really working hard and really sort of crushes it. And, they get done, they unload, I back them out of the seat, and, they'll sit there and, you can tell that they need a moment or two to compose themselves before they get up out of the seat. And oftentimes I'll say to them, that's brutal, isn't it? This exercise is just brutal, isn't it? And, I'll say, yeah, I just did my workout earlier today and I did the leg press and I know exactly what you're feeling right now. This is rough. So just take a minute and catch your breath a little bit and compose yourself, and I'll meet you at the next exercise. And just that empathy that they're not feeling anything unusual. They're not doing anything that I don't myself do and experience myself, and just having that, maybe that empathy, and having them realize that, Tim suffers the same way on this exercise as I just did. And I think that can help with a lot.
Definitely. So are we good on the form discrepancies? Do you want to move on to proper head and neck position?
Yeah. And cool. I think, obviously this falls into all of this, the discrepancies,
it's all interrelated.
Assumed versus real objective, but even the head and neck position, that's part of proper form, is maintaining the proper head and neck position. And what we're trying to do with this is we're trying to maintain a safe sort of neutral position of the head and neck, so that, one, we're not placing undue stress on sort of those finer structures, the vertebrae and things of that nature, but that we're also not unnecessarily stressing and straining, the neck muscles and things of that nature. So part of this is going to be the importance of sort of maintaining a neutral position so that muscles that aren't supposed to be tensed and engaged stay somewhat relaxed. We're also maintaining a position and a posture that we're not placing stress on structures that we don't want to place stress on. But even going back to this idea of the headache that can sometimes develop in people, this is also related to maintaining the proper head and neck position and keeping those muscles relaxed and those structures unstressed. So when we talk about the neutral head and neck position, one way of thinking about this is that, your head should not be extended back. It shouldn't be hanging down forward. You shouldn't be twisting, your head side to side, hanging your head and doing things like that. But probably the most kind of illustrative way of understanding it is that you should try to be maintaining what we call a fist distance between your chin and your chest. Okay. And keep in mind that on various exercises, your torso and your spine may be in different positions. Some exercises you're reclined. Some exercises you're more upright. Something like the pullover exercise, there's somewhat of a movement of the torso and a flexing forward as you're performing the exercise. In something like the torso rotation or the rotary torso exercise, your entire torso is rotating and moving. So if you think about this idea of a fist distance between your chin and your chest, wherever your torso goes, the head still maintains that same relationship. So if you're extending your body back, say like in a lumbar extension machine, you still maintain the same relationship of the fist distance from chin to chest. If you are flexing forward, like in an abdominal exercise, your head comes forward to the same degree that your torso is flexing forward. So in the rotary torso, a lot of times people will do is they want to rotate their torso, but they want to keep their head looking straight ahead. Okay, so in other words, as their torso turns, their head twists. It twists at a different degree than their torso is rotating. So you always want to maintain that neutral alignment, down the center of your chest, but also no extension of the head, no flexion forward of the head, keeping that neutral fist distance between those two things. So as a person performs the exercise, as I say, if the body is moving, if it's an exercise where the body's moving and the torso is moving, that head should follow in the same relationship. If it's an exercise where the torso is stationary and stable, their head should remain stationary and stable. And what's critical is that a person, like a lot of times what people will do on certain exercises, particularly on exercises where the head is against the pad, so the back pad of the exercise and their head is on the back pad. Sometimes people will want to push their head back into the pad and kind of with force push their head back against the pad and start to tense their head and neck muscles and do things like that. And putting all of that pressure, that pushing with their head against the pad, that can really, particularly with this issue of the headache, doing that and creating that pressure and putting that strain and tension on those neck muscles like that, particularly combined with holding your breath, that's one of the things that's thought to trigger this exercise induced headache. So in some cases, I will place like a neck roll between or behind their head and neck to support the head and neck and give them a comfortable, almost like a pillow to rest their head against. Other times, when that's not appropriate, I will tell them to, maintain a straight ahead posture. Find a spot, across the room to just keep your eyesight on, so that it maintains that constant head position and things like that. Particularly where you got to kind of watch it is doing sort of like a lumbar extension or a low back torso extension type of exercise, because as their torso moves back, oftentimes they'll want to let their head flop back. They'll extend their head. What's nice on the Medex medical lumbar extension, it's got a built-in, little head pad that's, that kind of keeps your head in that neutral position. Yeah. And even if you try to push with your head, you can't really change that neutral position, because when you push on the head pad, it pushes back on the back pad and it stabilizes against that. So that's kind of letting you maintain that proper head and neck position.
Of all the form discrepancies, though, I've found neutral head to be the easiest one to coach. As in, when someone starts to, make a mistake with the head position, when you correct it, in my experience, everyone seems to be able to do that on all the machines. And I guess just to summarize some of this, I know obviously you've got more to say on it, but the reason the listeners want to avoid it with their clients and for themselves is mostly due to increased risk of injury in terms of the structure of the neck, the skeleton and the musculature around the neck, but then also this increased likelihood of an exercise-induced headache. Those are the main things, right?
Yeah.
From your point of view.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Because you always get people tempted. Do you get this where, I know it's this actually, it's something it does take a little bit more focus, is to get the client to stop looking at the weight stack on the lumbar, right? They want to look at it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I sort of explained to them, like, I will do that, and you will intuitively gauge the range of motion the more you use it. And also in the squat position on the MedX leg press, right? Rather than keep their head, because you want to keep your head back on the pad on that one, right?
Yeah, right.
And they'll want to like cut. I mean, this is obviously different to the different thing, but it's still a head position thing. And they want to like curl their head away from the pad and look at the weight stack,
Right.
And that's another thing where you sometimes have to constantly coach.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times this is just somebody inadvertently kind of doing an instinctual thing that they want to watch or, something like that. But I agree with you. It is fairly easy to correct, where you just make that comment and tell them to correct, and a lot of times they'll do that, or to say something like you just said. But you don't need to you don't need to turn and look at the weight stack. Just focus on that. And so yeah. I mean, it's fairly easy to correct. And sometimes what I'll do too is, if they keep moving their head around or something like that, you make the verbal corrections. If they keep doing it, sometimes I'll just touch the back of their head and say, just keep this still. You don't need to move that. And just a light touch on the back of their head, just to give them that little reminder, just keep your head still, kind of a thing. And sometimes too, it's just, you get sometimes a reaction again to the work and the discomfort, where they're struggling to complete a repetition or something. And then it's just instinctually, like their head moves, or they throw their head back or something like that. And, things of that nature. So it's fairly easy to correct, and you not only teach them the proper position, but give them those pointers and reminders, and usually it corrects itself pretty quickly.
Yeah. Okay.
So
any more to say on that, or can we move on to breathing?
Yeah, I think that's probably all we need to say there.
Okay.
So with the breathing, keep in mind with the breathing, you're trying to accomplish a couple different things. One would be is you're trying to provide proper air exchange, proper oxygen exchange. You're trying to give your body sort of the oxygen that it needs, and the free flow of air through the lungs and through the airways, so that there's not any encumbrances, and that you're sort of in a way fueling the body with what it needs to perform the work. I've oftentimes pointed out to people is that, somebody that's doing a lot of breath holding and not breathing properly, I'll say, what do you think would happen if you tried to go out jogging and simultaneously held your breath while you're jogging? You obviously would not get very far. You'd very quickly just exhaust yourself and have to stop because you don't have any oxygen. And I tell them, well, that same thing applies here, is that you're not going to be able to perform at your best and get a good set and truly get the maximum out of your body if you're holding your breath and you're not breathing and your body's not getting the oxygen that it needs. Mm-hmm. The other thing that tends to happen is, and you can try this, if you just simply sit in a chair, calm and relaxed, but you sit there and you hold your breath, after a certain amount of time, you start to feel very anxious and sort of panicked. Okay. And as your body is deprived of that oxygen, it causes sort of this panic or this anxiety, because your body recognizes that this is not good and that you're not getting what it needs. So I think the improper breathing technique too can be a contributing factor to a person getting sort of panicked in the exercise and getting stressed and having this anxiety of the whole process that's going on, where when you sort of breathe freely and it will cause you to relax a little more and kind of relieve some of that anxiety. And then, of course, with the breathing, we're also trying to avoid those problems that I talked about with Valsalva, that we don't want to be causing that elevated blood pressure response. We don't want to be causing that interference of the circulation through the heart and that stress and strain on the heart and things like that. So what should be happening for the proper breathing technique is that there should be this continuous free flow of air. All right. And it's not something that you can do, particularly at the higher levels of exertion. It's not something that you can do with your mouth closed. You're not going to get enough oxygen if your mouth is closed and your lips are pursed and you're trying to breathe through your nose only. There's just not enough flow of air to properly give you the amount of oxygen that you need. So the proper breathing technique would be to keep your mouth open, let your jaw just sort of hang, and breathe freely through an open mouth, and allow yourself to continually breathe as needed. All right. During the first repetition or two, you're going to have a slower rate of breathing than you are at the end of the set. Okay. And it should be something where you're just letting that jaw hang open, breathing freely through an open mouth, and breathing as you need it and as is demanded by the intensity of the exercise. Okay. And there should be no breath holding. There's no need to sort of synchronize breathing. Used to hear in the old days that exhale as you lift the weight. That's right. And inhale as you lower it. That may be fine if you're doing a 1 second repetition, pressing it up in one and lowering in one. You could kind of put one breath to each direction. But particularly with the slower movement speeds, you're not going to take one long 10-second breath, out as you lift and one 10-second inhalation as you come down, or even, a 5-second breath or something and a 5-second breath on the way down. So there's going to be the need for multiple breaths per repetition. Okay. So it's going to be something where you're continually breathing and you're just letting that exchange occur, inhaling, exhaling, keeping that free flow of oxygen. And then of course it is going to ramp up and be harder or more rapid rather when the intensity increases and as you progress through the set. So the main thing I tell people is that number one, don't hold your breath. Okay. Number two, don't worry about synchronizing the breathing with the repetition scheme. Just breathe freely, keep your mouth open, breathe as much as you need to, let that oxygen flow freely and breathe as needed. Another thing that kind of comes into play here is that there are going to be those points during a repetition, particularly as you're struggling to complete a repetition where that instinct is to hold your breath. You want to counteract that by not only keeping in mind everything we just discussed, but sometimes you almost have to sort of pant your way through those rough spots or those sticking points or those kind of pant your way through that desire to hold your breath. And I'd much rather see somebody do that little pant and get through that rather than hold their breath and strain and Valsalva. Okay. So, I think most people, if they're taught and if they're reminded, again, this is something that a client may do repeatedly, but I usually see a pretty quick response. If I say somebody, stop holding your breath, open your mouth and breathe, they'll do that for several seconds. And then
are we talking about this panting? Is that the same as forced hyperventilation? I think is what Doug would have called it in Body by Science. It is to the same thing. Yeah. So just for the listeners, let me see if I get this right. So I'm going to just demonstrate this. So at the start of the exercise, you'll probably be like, or maybe rep 3, you'll be that kind of rate, right? Maybe slightly faster than normal. And then at the end, you're like, like that. So that would be the panting. Okay.
And the panting like that, like you just did, that may just occur for a couple of seconds as you work through a difficult phase. And then as you sort of complete the rep, it returns to a more,
especially when you're in that negative,
somewhat
back to normal.
More normal breathing. And oftentimes, especially people uninitiated to this high intensity training concept, they are oftentimes kind of confused or startled by the proper breathing technique. Because again, think of somebody in a typical gym doing just regular conventional training and fast reps and stuff. There's people grunting, groaning, straining, or there's people just doing, one breath as they lift the weight and one breath as they bring the weight down. So for people to see somebody training in a high intensity fashion with relatively slow repetitions and doing this heavy breathing and these occasional pants and, as you say, sort of forced hyperventilation to work through those sticking points or what have you, that seems rather strange.
Yeah, so foreign, isn't it, to most people?
And in fact, I just recently on one of my YouTube videos, I have a couple videos of myself working out and doing an exercise, and a person made a comment. They go, "Oh, that's a great machine, a great set on there, but I could do without all the hyperventilation." And I don't know. I can't even remember if I responded. I think I just ignored the person, but it was clear.
That's usually the best way to the thing to do. Yeah.
Right. And, the thing is that it's not hyperventilation. Hyperventilation is breathing more than you need. But if you're working at this high level of intensity and the demands upon your body and the muscles are through the roof, that oxygen is needed. You're not over breathing. You're breathing in a manner that's consistent with what your body requires at that intensity level and at that level of physiological stress. So it's not hyperventilating. But I think this comment came from a person that clearly had never trained like this before and is probably used to doing, faster repetitions and just, like I say, that, not as much breathing, or maybe they're holding their breath and they're grunting and straining.
They're using a ton of momentum and they're not loading their muscles, so it's nowhere near as challenging. It's a whole unison of things, isn't it, that causes them to not exhibit the same breathing. I just want to make one comment on this, which is something I found quite powerful is, there's a lot of talk right now about high intensity training and mindfulness, right? You got books coming out, people talking about it. It's really, again, it's one of those things where we all, those of us who have been in this for some time have kind of, we've used high intensity training as our form of meditation. I certainly do, because I don't meditate outside of that currently. And what I was talking to Skylar Tanner about is this idea of actually reviewing the way I breathe and being more conscious of it during the exercise. So I've got to a point now where I think what I was doing is I was actually breathing too vigorously too soon. And what I've learned to do a bit better is really control it, so that, that's just by focusing on it more. And so that, at the start of the exercise, I'm barely breathing. I'm breathing kind of normal, regular rhythm. And then halfway through, maybe it's getting a bit more vigorous, but I'm not getting into that panting till much later on. I think I was prematurely doing that, and it was actually reducing my exercise performance. So this is something I've really settled into lately is really focusing on the breath, focusing on breathing, actually making that a focal point during my workouts, and kind of getting a more of a, meditative benefit from training, which is kind of cool, and a better performance.
Yeah. And I think this is probably a good point to kind of tie all
Yeah.
this together and kind of wrap up on is that, what you want to create is a situation where you are very mindful, where you are very focused on what you're doing. Because number one,
Yeah.
all the details of what we're trying to accomplish and all the avoidance of all of these discrepancies, it takes a lot of concentration. You need to be paying attention to what you're doing. And you need to be as focused as possible and just internalize that focus and effort and concentrate on everything that you're doing. But also, this idea of somebody getting sort of panicked. If a person is sort of in a panic and they're getting desperate and they're trying to commit all these discrepancies and they're kind of inducing a lot of this anxiety upon themselves, and they're getting sort of stressed out over this whole process, and they're interpreting it as sort of this negative experience. And all of this is kind of fueling the bad behavior and the discrepancies. So the more that you can kind of relax, concentrate, breathe freely, don't react to the exercise. Somebody training correctly, it can oftentimes not appear to be as hard as it really is, because, if somebody's really focused and in control of themselves and concentrating and getting into this very mindful state, as you mentioned, and doing that, they're not going to be reacting to the discomfort. They're not going to
alleviates it. Yeah.
So you're not going to get all this moaning, groaning, grunting. You're not going to get this panicked response going on. You're going to get a very controlled, focused effort by somebody who's not reacting to all the discomfort. Okay. And that is important to not only be able to do everything correctly, but also to keep yourself composed and channeling your efforts where they should be, and not getting panicked and stressed and anxiety filled by the process.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Love it. Yeah. So we're at time. So if we wrap it up there, Tim, and we can obviously pick up in the next part. And thank you so much again for doing this. It's been an excellent podcast. And Tim, just briefly, just let the listeners know where they can find you and how they can get in touch with you about your other services.
Yeah. Any services, starting with just questions about things we've talked about, or if somebody is looking for some continuing education for themselves or for their staff, or any type of seminars, workshops on equipment, even equipment related services. I do a lot of equipment retrofitting and refurbishing services as well. Anything like that people are interested in, you can visit my facility's website at stronglifetraining.com. There's ways to contact me either by phone numbers, email, or just a contact form. Email is info@stronglifetraining. But I think the easiest thing, you go to the website and there's multiple ways of contacting me through that.
Great. Thank you, Tim. And for everyone listening, to find a blog post for this episode and the blog post for this entire series, and to download the PDF transcript, please go to highintensitybusiness.com and click the podcast button in the menu, search for episode 363. And until next time, thank you very much for listening. This episode is brought to you by ARX. You want to be a successful strength training studio owner. The problem is you aren't able to deliver the safest, most efficient and effective workouts, making it harder for you to attract and retain clients, which makes you feel frustrated. I understand that it can be difficult to differentiate your business without the right tools. ARX's breakthrough adaptive resistance technology uses patented motorized resistance and computer software to give you and your clients the perfect workout every single time. BioFit founder John Zarbok says that ARX is clearly the superior tool to deliver the exercise stimulus. My clients are seeing insane improvements in weeks, not months. I could not fathom running my business without ARX. So here's how you get started. Number one, go to arxfit.com/HOB to get $500 off your ARX machines. Number two, book a call with the ARX sales team. And number three, learn how ARX can help you grow your strength training business. Go to arxfit.com/HOB so you can stop struggling to attract and retain clients and start to grow your strength training business with confidence.